What happens when a prison guard laughs at a dying man for 3 straight nights, not knowing that the man screaming on that concrete floor is the younger brother of the most dangerous human being in Harlem? Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. Tuesday night, the 14th of May, 1946, 11:47 in the evening, Block D, Cell 217. A single corridor light threw a stripe of jaundiced yellow across the concrete floor, and in that stripe, curled into himself like a wounded animal, lay Ben Johnson, 31 years old, a musician, a quiet man who had never raised his hand against another human being. His appendix had swollen to the size of a tangerine and was threatening to rupture, temperature near 104 degrees. His body shook so violently that his teeth cracked against each other with every spasm, and he screamed, not from fear, from pain that turns a grown man into something primal, stripped of dignity and language, something that can only howl. Every inmate in the neighboring cells was awake. They heard every scream, the wet, ragged quality of it bouncing off concrete walls until it sounded like 10 men dying instead of 1. And they heard something else, laughter, low, satisfied, well-fed laughter from the guard post 15 meters away. Carl Schaefer sat with his boots on the desk, 247 pounds, former butcher from Indianapolis, eating a ham sandwich and reading the sports section of the Philadelphia Inquirer. He heard the screaming. Of course he heard it. He glanced down the corridor toward cell 217, where Ben Johnson's fingers were wrapped around the bars so tightly the knuckles had turned the color of old bone, and he chewed his sandwich, and he laughed, and he went back to reading about the Phillies. But before we go any further, remember one thing. In this story, there is a moment that almost nobody knows about. A moment in the back room of a pool hall on Lenox Avenue when Bumpy Johnson spoke 4 words, just 4, quietly, looking straight into the eyes of the one man he trusted above all others. 4 words that explain everything, why he did what he did, why this story became a legend that Harlem still whispers to this day. Those 4 words, we will get to them at the very end, because to understand what they mean, you need to walk the entire road first. Ben crawled toward the bars. His palms left wet streaks on concrete. He pulled himself to his knees, face pressing between 2 bars, whispering the only word his cracked lips could form. Doctor, again, a broken record, each repetition weaker than the last. Schaefer picked up a bucket of gray mop water and threw it through the bars. It hit Ben full in the face. He choked, fell backward, gasping, his screams replaced by the wet sound of a man trying to breathe through water. Schaefer turned to 2 guards behind him, Wallace and Briggs, both watching, neither moving. See that? Swims like a fish. Maybe we should build him a pool. They laughed. Not because it was funny, because in Lewisburg you did not disagree with Karl Schaefer. But in cell 221, 4 walls away, an old man named Finch, 63, former pickpocket from Lenox Avenue, pressed his face to the bars and listened. Finch knew who lay in cell 217, and more importantly, Finch knew who that man's older brother was. He whispered into the darkness just loud enough for his cellmate to hear. That guard is a dead man walking. He just does not know it yet. Night 1 of 3, 72 hours before the message would reach Harlem. 72 hours during which Schaefer would laugh at a dying man's screams, never once checking who was in cell 217, never once asking if this inmate had family, never once wondering whether the man on that wet concrete floor might be connected to someone whose name alone could make entire city blocks go silent. That failure of curiosity was about to cost him everything. To understand why what Schaefer was doing was not merely cruelty, but the single most dangerous decision of his life, you need to understand the man all of Harlem knew simply as Bumpy. 134th Street between 7th and Lenox, the unofficial capital of Black America. A man in a gray wool suit stood outside Louis Michaud's barbershop with a fresh copy of the Amsterdam News. His hat tilted slightly left. He was speaking to a grocer who owed $14 for protection, and he was not raising his voice. Bumpy Johnson never raised his voice. The grocer nodded, sweated, promised Friday, and walked away on legs that bent at the knees, not from a specific threat, from the weight of proximity to a man whose reputation was heavier than any weapon. Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, the uncrowned king of Harlem. What made him king was not violence, though he was capable of it, not money, though he controlled more of it than anyone north of 110th Street. It was patience. The most patient man in the history of New York organized crime, and patience combined with intelligence and absolute ruthlessness creates something no amount of muscle can defeat. Bumpy was a man who measured every word the way a jeweler measures diamonds. The people closest to him could count on one hand the moments when he said something that changed the expressions on their faces. One of those moments is still ahead of us, the speed version. 1933, Bumpy walked out of prison, found that Dutch Schultz had taken over Harlem, and took it back within 6 months. By 1940, he controlled every illegal dollar north of 110th. An empire built not on muscle, but on mind. And here is what nobody expected. This man who could make entire organizations tremble had exactly one vulnerability, one crack in the armor, his younger brother Ben, the only person on earth in front of whom Bumpy removed his mask completely. Ben was everything Bumpy was not: quiet, gentle, musical. He played harmonica on rooftops and dreamed of jazz clubs. No talent for the street and no interest in learning. Bumpy once told his closest lieutenant, Junie Bird, "I can lose money, I can lose territory, I can lose my freedom, but if someone touches my brother, I will lose my mind, and when I lose my mind, other people lose considerably more." Summer of 1938. The rooftop of a building on 141st Street. Ben sat on the ledge playing a harmonica. Slow, bluesy, imperfect. Bumpy sat beside him, eyes closed, face completely relaxed. The only minutes when the furrow of alertness left his brow. Remember this harmonica. It will come back. In 1941, one of Schultz's former men pushed Ben on the street, called him a word no man should call another. 2 hours later, Bumpy knew. 24 hours later, the man made 23 phone calls, apologizing to every person he knew for being stupid enough to disrespect the brother of Bumpy Johnson. Each call supervised. Then the man left New York. Forever. That was for a push and a slur. Scale it up. Multiply the offense by 1,000. Imagine what this man would do when he learned a prison guard spent 3 nights laughing while his brother screamed. Before Bumpy could act, you need to understand how Ben ended up in Lewisburg, because that story makes everything Schaefer did not just cruel, but obscene. 21 seconds. That is how long it took to destroy Ben Johnson's life. January 23rd, 1946, 1:31 in the afternoon. The corner of 137th and 5th Avenue. Ben walked out of a music shop carrying guitar strings. 2 men in gray overcoats approached from opposite directions. Federal agents. 21 seconds later, handcuffs. In his coat pocket, the agents claimed to find heroin. Ben swore it was planted. No witnesses. The arrest suspiciously smooth, as though rehearsed. because it was. Agent Dennis O'Brien had planted evidence on 16 black men before Ben. 16 out of 16 guilty verdicts. But O'Brien was not hunting Ben. He was hunting Bumpy. Ben was bait. The federal government wanted Bumpy to lash out, break the law trying to free his brother, giving them pretext to lock Bumpy away for 20 years. Bumpy understood immediately. Attorney Thurgood Marshall, future Supreme Court Justice, told him directly, "Mr. Johnson, your brother is bait. Every illegal step you take becomes a nail in your own coffin. They are not hunting Ben, they are hunting you." Bumpy listened. Then, "How long?" 7 years. 7 years, for guitar strings and a planted packet. He pulled out a small black leather notebook, wrote 3 names, O'Brien, McCarthy, the judge who gave black defendants double sentences, Weinberg, the prosecutor, closed it, each name a promise. Do you remember those 4 words I mentioned? The ones Bumpy spoke in the back room of a pool hall. Right here, in this moment, as he wrote those names in his notebook, those 4 words were forming in his mind. He had not spoken them aloud yet, but they already existed, and they would determine everything that happened next. For 4 months, Bumpy played by the rules. Appeals, attorneys, legal channels, no threats, no bribes, because he believed the system, however rotten, maintained at least a threshold of humanity, that his brother was at least safe, that a prisoner had the right to medical care. On the 14th of May, that belief collapsed. What began that night in cell 217 lasted 3 days, 72 hours of screaming that everyone heard and no one answered. The brown paper bag with guitar strings fell from Ben's hands during the arrest. An agent stepped on it. Metal strings punctured the paper and jutted outward like silver needles catching the January sun. Nobody picked them up. The last thing Ben saw as a free man, crushed guitar strings in dirty snow. Those 72 hours transformed Bumpy Johnson from a man willing to wait into a man willing to act. And what happened during the second and third nights was worse than the first. First night, screaming, bucket of water, Schaefer laughs. Second night, guard Peterson, 23, wife pregnant, writes a report requesting a doctor for Ben. Schaefer picks up the report, reads it, looks Peterson in the eye, and tears it in half, slowly, then brings 2 guards to cell 217 for a viewing party. Ben's voice has returned, hoarse, shredded, the sound of vocal cords scraped raw. Schaefer commentates like a ringside announcer. Watch him roll. 10 points for artistry. Throws a second bucket of water across the floor, so Ben lies shivering in ice water while burning with fever. Ben did not know that 320 kilometers north, his brother carried inside himself 4 words like a loaded weapon, waiting only for a reason to speak them aloud. Third night, Thursday, 6 in the morning. Ben stopped screaming. Complete silence. And that silence was more terrifying than any sound he had made. His skin, waxy yellow, breathing rapid and shallow, the breath of a body beginning to shut down. The inmates did the only thing they could. They knocked on the pipes. 1 cell, 5, 20. By noon, all 38 cells hammered in unison, 276 beats per minute. The sound traveled through pipes and walls, through the concrete skeleton of the building. Even inmates in Block A, 3 walls away, heard it, like a heartbeat, like a countdown. Schaefer took away yard privileges, cut the water, threatened solitary. The knocking grew louder. Thursday, 3 in the afternoon. Finch shouted through his bars as Schaefer passed. "Guard Schaefer, that man will not make it through the night, and when his brother finds out, there is no wall in this country high enough to hide you." Schaefer stepped close to Finch's cell, face flushed from heat and the infernal banging. His brother? What is his brother going to do? Write a complaint? Finch answered in a whisper so quiet Schaefer had to lean closer, pressing his ear almost against the bars. And later, replaying this moment, Schaefer would realize the old man's voice contained something worse than anger. It contained pity. No, Mr. Schaefer, he will not write a complaint. He is not the kind of man who writes. Schaefer pulled back, not from the words, from something in the old man's eyes. A 63-year-old pickpocket behind bars, looking at a 247-pound guard with a baton and feeling sorry for him. For the first time in 3 days, Schaefer did not laugh. 3 nights, 72 hours. Schaefer turned Ben's suffering into entertainment. He never checked who was in cell 217, never wondered what if. On Friday morning, a tiny note written in pencil on a scrap of cigarette wrapper left Lewisburg inside a lawyer's briefcase. By 9:21 the next morning, it was being read by a man whose name made entire neighborhoods go quiet. And what that man did in the following 24 hours permanently divided Carl Schaefer's life into before and after. Friday, the 17th of May, 9:21 in the morning, Louis Michaud's barber shop, 134th Street. Hot towel on the face, the scent of Pinot aftershave, Billie Holiday on the radio singing Strange Fruit. Bumpy sat in the chair while Michaud worked a straight razor along his neck. An ordinary Friday morning, the last ordinary morning of Carl Schaefer's functional life. The door opened. Ray Stafford, 26, one of Bumpy's runners, his face the color of old newspaper, hands trembling visibly. Michaud saw him in the mirror and stopped the razor mid-stroke. Bumpy removed the towel. Stafford held out a folded scrap of cigarette wrapper, carried from Lewisburg through 3 pairs of hands in 48 hours. Bumpy unfolded it. Red. Small, cramped pencil. Ben sick 3 days. Guard Schaefer Block D. No doctor. Laughing. Ben bad. Very bad. Hurry. Michaud told the story for 30 years, to anyone who asked and anyone who did not. Bumpy read the note, folded it, put it in his pocket. His face did not change, not one muscle, but his eyes. Michaud would say, it was like someone turned off the lights behind his pupils, like the man I knew for 15 years left, and something else sat down in his place, something that did not have a name. Bumpy stood, removed the barber's cape, hung it neatly over the armrest. The guard's name is Schaefer. Yes, Mr. Johnson, Karl Schaefer. Does he have a family? Stafford did not understand the question. Years later, he would. Bumpy was not asking from compassion. Every detail a tool, every fact a weapon. Wife and 2 children. In Sunnyside. Bumpy nodded. Once. Call Junie. Tell him operation, everyone, at my place in 1 hour. And right now, in this exact second, as Bumpy stood with the note in his hand and Michaud watched the light drain from his eyes, the 4 words crossed from thought into decision. He would speak them in 5 hours, in the back room of a pool hall, looking into Junie Bird's eyes. And when he spoke them, Bird, a man who had survived the wars with Schultz, who believed himself impossible to frighten, would take 1 physical step backward, not from fear, from understanding. What did he say? Soon. But first, the plan. 1 hour, 4 telephone calls. The rotary dial clicking, whirring, clicking, whirring. Michaud would later say this sound, Bumpy's finger methodically turning that dial, was the most ominous sound he had ever heard, because each rotation was calm, measured, no rush, no tremor. This is how a man dials when he knows exactly what he is doing, when he can already see the ending, and the ending satisfies him completely. Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock. The back room of Red's Pool Hall on 136th Street. Chalk, old wood, cigar smoke. One lamp above the pool table, a cone of yellow cutting through dimness. 6 men. Bumpy stood with fingertips on the green felt like a pianist before the first chord. His voice barely above a whisper, he laid out the operation like a chess game. Not revenge. Surgery. 3 directions. First, information. Bumpy's contact inside Lewisburg, a man who owed him a debt, spreads one phrase among Block D inmates. The brother knows. The brother asks one favor. 28 inmates ready. Second, technical. Through a former electrician in Block C, Bumpy learned the key detail. The staircase to the second-floor supply room was metal, with railings bolted to the wall, bolts rusted over 25 years. If loosened 3 or 4 turns, the railings would look normal but would not support a man's weight, especially not 247 pounds. Third, behavioral. Saturday night during Schaefer's shift, inmates create noise on the second floor. Not a riot, a disturbance. Enough for Schaefer to climb the stairs, alone, because Schaefer never brought backup. He considered it weakness. And while the bolts gave way in Lewisburg, Bumpy would be sitting in Minton's Jazz Club on 118th Street, surrounded by 12 witnesses, listening to Thelonious Monk, 320 kilometers away, untouchable. Junie Bird listened in silence. Then, Bumpy, what if the railings hold? That smile, the one without warmth, without humor, without anything except certainty. Junie, the man weighs 247 pounds. He always leans on the railing, every time, 3 times per shift. The bolts are loosened, 4 meters high, concrete below. This is not a question of if, it is a question of when, and when is tomorrow night. And Ben? Already in the prison hospital. Surgery was performed. He will live. The billiard balls clicked behind the wall. Then why? Bumpy's eyes lifted, slowly. Because he laughed, Junie. 3 nights. He laughed. Silence so thick that 6 men heard each other breathing. Nobody laughs at my brother. Nobody. Ever. And Bumpy smiled that same smile, and his voice dropped below a whisper to something almost just the movement of lips. And he said 4 words, just 4. And Bird stepped back. 1 physical step. Not from fear, from the understanding that what he had heard was not a threat, not revenge, not anger, something else entirely. Something that explained not just Schaefer, not just Lewisburg, but everything Bumpy Johnson had ever done. What were those 4 words? We are almost there. First the staircase, first the bolts, first 247 pounds meeting concrete. That night, Bumpy went home, took out a chessboard, and played against himself until 3 in the morning. Every game ended the same. White won in 17 moves. Then he slept like a man with nothing on his conscience. Saturday, the 18th of May, 1946, 10:11 in the evening, Block D, Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Carl Schaefer arrived for his night shift, carrying a paper bag with a ham sandwich, a newspaper under his arm, and the comfortable certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. 247 pounds, baton on his belt, keys jangling. He was in a good mood. His wife had baked apple pie. The children had been well behaved. Life, in the estimation of Karl Schaefer, was good. He walked past cell 217, empty. Ben was in the prison hospital recovering from surgery. Schaefer did not turn his head. An empty cell was an empty space. He felt nothing. In 38 cells, 38 pairs of eyes tracked him through the bars. 38 men who knew what was coming. 11:17, a crash from the second floor, something metallic falling, A shout. Then another crash, louder. Schaefer looked up from his newspaper. He reached for his baton. Peterson sat at the desk at the far end of the corridor. "Chief, maybe both of us should go?" "Sit down. It is rats." Schaefer walked toward the staircase, alone, as always, because Carl Schaefer feared nothing inside these walls. 247 pounds, a baton, a set of keys. What could possibly happen? 11:18. Schaefer reached the staircase. Metal, 4 meters, 22 steps, railings bolted to the wall. His foot on the first step, the familiar creak. Left hand finding the railing, automatic, the kind of gesture your body performs without consulting your brain. 247 pounds transferring to the left hand with every upward step. Through the 4 words spoken in a pool hall on Lenox Avenue, through the calm fingers of a man dialing 4 numbers on a rotary telephone, through 320 kilometers of highway and concrete and razor wire, the consequence was arriving, step by step, bolt by bolt, first step, second, third, 11th, halfway up, 2 meters above concrete, another crash from above. He quickened his pace. Left hand gripped harder. Right hand raised the baton. Full weight plus momentum pressed against the left railing. The first bolt came out of the wall. The sound was quiet, a metallic crunch, like someone snapping a dry branch. Then the second bolt. Then the third, louder, with a screech that cut through silence like a blade across glass. The railing separated from the wall by 2 inches. 6 inches. Then in a single instant the railing swung into empty air, and 247 pounds that 1 second ago had been supported by metal were supported by nothing. Time decelerated. Schaefer hung suspended. His brain had not registered the fall, but his body knew. Left hand clutched vacancy. Feet lost the steps. The baton flew from his right hand and struck concrete below with a sharp crack. A fraction of a second later, Schaefer followed. 2 meters, concrete, 247 pounds. Impact. Not a dull sound, a wet one. The sound of a large body meeting a hard surface at velocity. A crack, the left arm absorbing primary impact, radius snapping in a compound fracture. A second crack, ribs, head striking concrete at a glancing angle, opening a gash from temple to jaw. Schaefer was alive, conscious and screaming. He was screaming in pain, in the empty corridor of Block D, and 38 cells heard that scream. Not a single inmate knocked on the pipes. Finch, cell 221, heard Schaefer's scream, turned to his cellmate, spoke softly, almost tenderly. "Hear that? He is screaming. I wonder when the doctor will come. Perhaps the doctor will also decide he is faking." Finch lay down on his cot, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 nights, slept peacefully. 2 sounds mirroring exactly what had happened 3 days earlier. A scream, but now the screamer was Schaefer, and silence, but now the silent ones were the inmates. 38 cells. 38 men who had spent 3 days listening to Schaefer laugh at another man's agony. Now they listened to his, and said nothing. No knocking, no calls for help, absolute, dense, symmetrical silence. Schaefer lay on that concrete floor for 23 minutes before Peterson heard the screams and came running. 23 minutes, less than 3 nights. But for Schaefer, those 23 minutes became longer than his entire previous life, because for the first time he lay on concrete, screaming, and nobody came. For the first time he felt what Ben had felt. 3 breaks in the left arm, 2 of which would never heal correctly. 4 cracked ribs, concussion, a scar from temple to chin. He would never return to active duty, never hold a baton properly, and never laugh that full, satisfied, belly-deep laugh, because the deep breath required for such laughter now sent fire through shattered ribs. Every time he forgot and drew a deep breath, the pain stopped him, and in that stopped breath he remembered. Block D, the staircase, the sound of bolts leaving a wall, and at Minton's Jazz Club on 118th Street, 320 kilometers away, at the exact second the bolts left the wall, Bumpy Johnson sat with closed eyes listening to Thelonious Monk play round midnight. 12 witnesses. He had not left all evening, had not made calls, had not received notes. At 11:18, Monk struck a chord, and Bumpy would later call it the most beautiful chord he had ever heard. That exceeded every expectation. The man who 1 week ago felt invincible behind concrete walls now lay in a hospital bed, unable to lift his left arm or draw a full breath. But the staircase was only the beginning. What came next was worse, not for his body, for his entire existence. Sunday morning, the 19th of May, the office of Warden Colonel William Harding, coffee growing cold. Harding read the incident report. Guard Schaefer, fall from staircase, railing detached. Cause, corrosion of mounting bolts. Conclusion, workplace injury due to negligent maintenance. Everything clean, everything logical, and every word of it, Harding was certain, was a lie. He brought in Captain Morris, former military police, tough, methodical. Morris interrogated 38 inmates and 11 staff in 2 days. Result? 0. Every inmate the same answer. I was sleeping, did not see anything, did not hear anything. 38 men sleeping, all at the same time. None heard a 247-pound body hit concrete. Morris threatened solitary, promised privileges, hinted at additional sentences. The wall did not move, not a crack. 38 men, many of whom would normally sell out their own mothers for a reduced sentence, all saying the identical thing with identical calm. I was sleeping. The electrician from Block C passed a polygraph. Inconclusive. The bolts had been rusted when he arrived 14 months earlier. True, he had simply helped them along, 3 or 4 turns. Proving the difference between natural corrosion and a bolt loosened by 4 turns was impossible, especially with the bolt already deformed in an evidence bag. Morris met Harding behind closed doors. Colonel, I interviewed 49 people, and the strangest part is not that they are silent. It is how they are silent. They are not nervous. They look me in the face and say I was sleeping with certainty that suggests they believe it. I have been interrogating people for 20 years. I have never seen discipline like this. This is not fear. This is loyalty, and whoever they are loyal to is beyond my reach. The bolts? Rusted. 25 years. Could have failed at any time, but could also have lasted another 5. Conclusion? Morris opened the folder, closed it, opened it again. Workplace injury, negligent maintenance. Harding nodded. He knew. Morris knew. Everyone knew, and everyone was silent, because there was nothing to prove. The plan had been flawless. On the cover of a thin beige folder, one word in the conclusion field, accident. That word was a monument to the genius of Bumpy Johnson, an operation planned in 22 hours, executed by men who risked years of freedom for someone sitting 320 kilometers away in a jazz club. But for Bumpy, this was not a period. It was a comma. Schaefer lay in a hospital with a shattered arm, but Ben lay in a prison hospital recovering from surgery that should have been performed 3 days earlier, 3 days that nearly cost his life. And while Morris wrote the word accident, Bumpy's lawyer was preparing something that would hit the system harder than any broken staircase. Attorney Samuel Leibowitz filed a federal lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons for deliberate denial of medical care. Simultaneously, a story appeared in the Amsterdam News from an anonymous source. A black inmate screamed for 3 days while a white guard laughed and threw water on him. Front page. Within a week, every major black newspaper in the country ran it. The Bureau was caught in a vice. Federal lawsuit from above, public pressure from below. Journalists calling daily, "Is it true inmates are denied medical care based on race?" The deputy director in Washington told Harding, "Terminate Schaefer for cause and review the Johnson case, find grounds for reduction. I do not need a martyr." Schaefer terminated. No pension bonus. Career finished. Bumpy cut out the Amsterdam News article and placed it in his black notebook alongside 3 names. July 1946. Federal Judge Harris reviewed Ben's case. Leibowitz presented evidence that O'Brien had systematically fabricated cases. 11 of 16 showed procedural violations. 4 convictions already overturned. Ben's became the 5th. August 12, 1946. Ben Johnson walked through the gates of Lewisburg. 7 months instead of 7 years. The same clothes hanging on him like fabric on a wire hanger. He squinted in sunlight. Real sunlight. At the gate, a black Cadillac. Junie Bird behind the wheel. Bumpy in the back seat. Ben got in, looked at his brother. Bumpy looked at Ben. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. 2 brothers who had not seen each other in 7 months. One had walked through 3 nights of screaming. The other had engineered a staircase, a lawsuit, a media campaign, and the systematic dismantling of 3 careers in return. Ben spoke first, his voice hoarse, the permanent rasp that 3 nights of screaming had burned into his vocal cords. "You know what happened to that guard?" Bumpy raised an eyebrow. Innocently, almost comically. "What guard?" Ben smiled. "First time in 7 months. "Thank you, brother." Bumpy reached into his jacket and produced something wrapped in cloth. Ben unwrapped it. A harmonica. New, chromium-plated, a Hohner. The finest money could buy. Ben brought it to his lips, and from the back seat of a Cadillac parked outside a federal prison, there came a sound Bumpy had not heard in 7 months. A sound for which he would have broken not one staircase, but every brick in Lewisburg. Bird pulled away. The Cadillac turned onto the highway. Lewisburg disappeared in the rearview mirror. The rooftop of 141st Street, summer of 38, Ben playing, Bumpy's eyes closed. Now the back seat of a Cadillac, August 46, the same sound, the same closed eyes, the same peace. The circle had closed. The music had returned. But Bumpy's black notebook still held 3 names. "And you have walked this entire road. You have heard Ben's screams and Schaefer's laughter. You have watched the light leave Bumpy's eyes in the barber shop. You have earned the right to know what happened to those 3 names and to hear the 4 words that explain everything, 18 months. That is how long Bumpy waited. The weapon he wielded better than any other, first name, Agent O'Brien. 6 months after Ben's release, an anonymous complaint triggered an internal investigation. Drafted so professionally, investigators assumed it came from inside the system. Flawless information, names, dates, case numbers, specific violations. O'Brien was terminated. Quietly. He applied to the NYPD. Rejected. Private agencies. Rejected. Everywhere. Your service record raises concerns. He moved from New York to Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore. In each city, after months, his past surfaced. Within 3 years, he was a night watchman at a warehouse in Newark. The man who fabricated cases and broke lives sat in a booth staring into darkness, and every time he heard footsteps, his heart quickened, because somewhere in Harlem, a man had a black notebook and his name had not been crossed out. Second name, Judge McCarthy. His voluntary resignation was only the beginning. A year later, his wife filed for divorce. 18 months later, newspapers published material about his financial connections to prison contractors, documents that somehow found their way to the New York Post. McCarthy never returned to the bench. He relocated to a farm in Connecticut and lived in obscurity so complete it was as though someone had erased him. Third name, Prosecutor Weinberg, the quietest and most terrifying. 8 months after Ben's release, Weinberg received an envelope, no return address. Inside, a photograph of himself leaving a restaurant with a woman who was not his wife. On the back, one word, remember. A month later, a second envelope. His children walking to school. Remember. 2 months later, a third. His own photograph taken through his bedroom window while he slept. Remember. Always. Weinberg transferred to Albany, then Syracuse, then left the prosecutor's office entirely. Nobody proved the envelopes were connected to Bumpy Johnson, and if anyone had asked, Bumpy would have raised that eyebrow and said, "What envelopes?" Bumpy reached into his jacket, took out the black notebook, opened it to the page with 4 entries. O'Brien, McCarthy, Weinberg, Schaefer. With a fountain pen, slowly he drew a line through each name. 4 lines, 4 fates. The notebook closed. 4 names under 4 lines, like 4 headstones on a paper cemetery. Years later, a journalist from the Amsterdam News asked directly, "Mr. Johnson, there are rumors the guard at Lewisburg was not injured by accident, that you arranged it." Bumpy smiled, broadly, warmly. "Young man, Lewisburg is an old facility. Bolts rust. Staircases fall apart. Do I look like a man who knows about bolts?" Pause. "As for the bolts, sometimes the Lord sends justice through unusual channels. Through rusty bolts, for example. It is not for me to judge." The journalist turned off his recorder. They both knew. Now, the 4 words. 1960, 14 years after Lewisburg. Junie Bird sat in a bar on 132nd Street, drinking whiskey, telling the story to a young man who had just begun working for Bumpy. "Is it true Bumpy arranged the guard's fall?" Bird finished his whiskey, set the glass down. Ice clinked once against the bottom. "I will tell you one thing, once, and you will never repeat it in front of Bumpy." The young man nodded. When Bumpy read that note about Ben screaming and the guard laughing, he did not shout, did not curse, did not slam his fist. He gathered us in the back room, explained everything, bolts, staircase, noise, alibi. When he finished, I asked, "Bumpy, what if it does not work? What if the railing holds?" Bird paused, looked at his empty glass. He looked at me, with those eyes, you know the ones, where it seems like there is no bottom behind them, and he said 4 words. The young man waited. 4 words I remember every day. That explain everything. Not just Schaefer, not just Lewisburg, everything Bumpy Johnson ever did. Silence. He said, "Nobody touches my people." The young man was quiet. 4 words. Nobody touches my people. Not I will get revenge. Not he will pay. Not we will get him. Nobody touches my people. Do you understand the difference? The young man did not. Revenge is about the past, about something that already happened. But nobody touches my people. That is about the future. It is not a threat. It is a law. A physical law, like gravity. Bumpy was not punishing Schaefer. He was establishing a law that any person, guard, federal agent, judge, anyone who harms one of his people will face consequences, not because Bumpy is cruel, because a law is a law. Bird signaled for another whiskey. Nobody touches my people. Schaefer touched. Schaefer learned the law works. That is the whole story. Autumn 1948. The rooftop of 141st Street. Evening. Harlem spread below, lights and music and voices. Ben sat on the edge playing the chromium honer. Slow, bluesy, with the rasp that 3 nights of screaming had put into his voice and would never leave. Bumpy sat beside him, eyes closed, face relaxed, no furrow, no ice, just a man listening to his brother play music under a sky that was not bounded by the ceiling of cell 217. And in Indianapolis, Carl Schaefer sat behind the cash register of his cousin's meat shop, massaging his left wrist where the bone had healed crooked, flinching every time someone in the shop laughed too loudly. Every loud laugh dragged him back to Block D, to his own voice saying, "Swims like a fish," and the memory of how good it had felt to be powerful, and how quickly that power had been taken by something as ordinary as a rusted bolt. The story spread through Harlem like fire through dry grass. Details changed with every telling. In some versions he fell from the 3rd floor, in others the 5th, but branch snapping, like a bolt leaving a wall, like the end of the life you knew. Nobody touches my people. And a harmonica playing on a rooftop, long after the lights went out. If this story kept you watching until the very end, then you already understand something that most people never learn, that the most dangerous man in any room is not the one who shouts. It is the one who speaks 4 words in a whisper and means every single one. If you felt that, share this with someone who needs to hear it.